Hey, welcome to Beyond Organic Wine. I'm Adam Huss, coming to you from Spencer, New York. Thanks so much for listening. Beyond Organic Wine is a podcast and a Substack about the ecology of wine. If you're listening, you probably love wine, or took a left turn at Albuquerque and found yourself somewhere you didn't expect to end up. But if you love wine, you probably drink it because it lights up that part of yourself that reminds you about the joy of living. It piques your senses with delicious flavors and aromas. It flows through beautiful social connections and unites you with ancient cultural expressions, while echoing a song of sunlight gathered by these miraculous life processes we call plants, and condensed into a liquid that changes yellow to gold and red to ruby. The premise of this podcast is that the way we grow and produce wine would benefit from being guided by the same love and values with which we drink it. If you'd like to support this podcast and the work that goes into each episode, please subscribe to the Beyond Organic Wine Substack at beyondorganicwine.substack.com. And you'll also get full access to all the podcasts, resources, and writing that happens there. If you'd like to sponsor an episode, please email me at connect@organicwinepodcast.com. And last but definitely not least, please follow and leave a great review in your podcast app. It's super cheap for you. In fact, it's free, and it's immensely helpful for this podcast. Thank you so much for your support. And a big, big thank you to those of you who are already subscribers and already have supported in many different ways. Really appreciate it and couldn't do it without you. Early bird tickets are on sale for Embracing Hybrid Grapes in California, a conference that's happening this January 26th, 2026 at UC Davis. You can get tickets and more info at embracinghybridgrapes.com. And we already have some great sponsors. I want to give a big thanks to Piscinus Ranch, No Regrets Initiative. Also, Herrick Grapevines Nursery. And Amiti. Amiti happens to be the winery of today's guest, Ruben Lang. But I invited him to be a guest before he became a sponsor. It just happened as we talked. Ruben first worked a harvest in 2016, but he's packed in something like 12 harvests since then by bouncing between northern and southern hemispheres and 3 continents, including some notable vintages at Idiot's Grace in the Columbia River Gorge, Maison Maynard in the Jura, and Forlorn Hope in California. Ruben says of Amiti, quote, "The goal of this project, beyond employing the basic tenets of good land stewardship, both in my farming and the vineyards I choose to purchase from, caring for all those who work for me and crafting wines that are meant to celebrate those I hold dear, is to deeply explore a sustainable future for Oregon and push the envelope of hybrid grape varieties. I love vinifera and want to continue to celebrate it, given the remarkable wines that come from them in the state. However, we as an industry continue to push the narrative of this being Pinot country, a notion that I believe to be utterly false given the challenges associated with farming it here, and fail to focus on varieties that are better suited to our climate and its ever-shifting nature. For that reason, I choose to work with what are considered atypical or non-normative varieties for this region, specifically those that I believe are well adapted to the level of climate change I will experience in my lifetime. I choose to make hybrid wines because I believe that they are the only option for a sustainable future in this state and present an exciting possibility to develop a true sense of place and varietal typicity free from the constraints imposed on us by the old world. If we truly want to develop an understanding of what American terroir looks like and tastes like, it seems like a no-brainer to me to do it with a variety that has no mandates handed down from the, quote, higher-ups, end quote. On the last episode, we considered how natural wine is not about minimizing intervention, but about a total perspective shift to seeing life as a process to celebrate. On this episode, we again flip a common understanding of natural wine on its head as we discuss how natural wine is not about removing human influence, but actually finding the distinctively personal touch of humans engaged in intentionally fermenting. In this spirit, Ruben makes a case for abandoning the 0-0 ethos, or at least any celebration of it or smugness related to it, referring to it as a kind of recipe winemaking for natural wine. This is a wildly pro-human discussion of wine that will piss off the misanthropes and the worshippers of that pristine ideal known as quote-unquote nature, which is kept pure by lack of contact with the malodorous miscreants known as people. Rather, we envision wine as a flowing stream in which we, besotted beavers that we are, immerse ourselves in play and mate and build dams to overflow the banks and flood our communities with life. I was in a tasting room this week in which I heard something I don't think I've ever heard before in a tasting room, and it blew me away. I asked why one of the wines had a Spanish name, and I asked this because this tasting room was in Quebec, where French is the primary language, followed by English. The woman behind the bar said, and I'm trying to quote her pretty closely, she said, quote, "It's in honor of our vineyard workers. We have 8 people from Guatemala who do the work in the vineyards, and we're really grateful for them and their hard work. Without them, none of us would have a job," end quote. I've been in a lot of tasting rooms, and I've never heard that kind of expression of frank and sincere appreciation for the dependence of a winery, and really our entire wine industry, on the labor of migrant workers. And what must it be like to fly up from Guatemala to start pruning in late winter in Quebec? Look, I know naming a wine in Spanish doesn't pay the bills. And I don't have the details about how the migrant workers' pay and benefits are done, so I don't know if this is all lip service. I don't think it is, but I don't know. But this open expression of gratitude in tasting rooms is at least a good start. Have you ever heard a tasting room staff thank the vineyard workers for making their jobs possible? I'll take that. And as you'll hear, this is very relevant to Ruben's discussion of natural wine. Ruben makes his wine in honor of the people who make it possible. His wines have been described as, quote, disorientingly delicious. And I hope you'll find this conversation to be the same. Enjoy. Thank you so much for doing this. Welcome to Beyond Organic Wine. It's a pleasure.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry I didn't hit record sooner. You were waxing so eloquently about natural wine. But continue if you'd like. Well, we were talking. I'll just set you up again. So I was talking about, Gideon Cloceron, who picks his grapes by feel. And even if I'm paraphrasing, let's say whatever it is, but like he's, the idea being that he's squeezing each cluster, and that there's a certain give, like the way that you would squeeze an avocado at a grocery store. And we all like, if we don't all like any, there obviously people are listening around the planet who don't eat avocados, right. But whatever the fruit is that, needs that perfect moment of ripeness. And it's like, for me, if I can describe an avocado, it's like, there's a give, but not too much give,
Right.
Like, it's like,
right.
You don't want it hard, because then you have to wait forever. Or if you try to, like you can't eat whatever. And you don't want it too soft, because then it's a mushy. There's probably brown spots. It's probably spoiled.
Right.
But if there's a little give, if it's like you squeeze it and it sort of stays, like you can almost leave a finger impression, but doesn't. Right. You can't wish it. So anyway, there's that specific moment. And if you look at your grapes that way, if there's this feel to the grape that you have learned that you like, and you always consistently harvest at that, whatever that is, if you're happy with the way that turns into wine, then that can just define your house style. Like, why even worry about numbers? Why even worry about anything else? Because then you have an ethos, or whatever. Right. You have a practice. You have you have a house style defined by that picking choice. So
right, exactly. And I guess
and
I
you
should
said
first...
some great stuff.
Oh yeah. Well, and I guess I should just first start by saying thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, and so many like people that I really admire and look up to have been on your podcast. So it feels quite special to get to be here alongside them. But I think what I kind of said in response to that was, I think that you really managed to pretty beautifully capture the ethos of natural winemaking as I understand it, and that like simple sentiment of conveying that anecdote from Gideon, which is like, at the end of the day, what really matters is that you, the winemaker and wine grower, are engaging with a process in a way that feels unique to you, with the ultimate goal of carrying it from point A all the way through to the end. And it's not maybe, person B is someone who really needs to stick to the numbers, and that works for them, and that's great. And much like you said, that will be their house style. But then in the case of Gideon, it is just as valid to approach your picking decisions in that way. And as long as there is that consistency and you're honoring of that being the approach that works for you, then great. That's ultimately what matters. Because I think, when we talk about natural wine, for me, it has so much less to do with what is or is not added. And hopefully, all of the real dogmatic folks who are listening to this put on earmuffs for that comment that I just made. But, to me, what really matters is when I taste the wine that I feel like I taste the maker, that I'm like sitting and looking across from them, even if they're not there while I'm drinking it. And I think that really can only happen when you have that type of engagement with the process, meaning something that feels true and sincere to you. You're not someone who's being burdened by every single technocratic winemaker, peering over your shoulder saying, that TA is too high, or you haven't hit, peak phenolic ripeness by the various metrics we're able to quantify at ETS or with spectrophotometry. Like, it doesn't matter if that's not how you want to engage with it. There's no shortage of natural winemakers who run every analysis under the world and make beautiful wine, and there's no shortage of folks who wouldn't even know what a hydrometer was if it was labeled and laying in front of them and make beautiful wine. So I think, it doesn't, as long as you're making something that's resembling the product it came from, which is my polite way of saying you haven't let it go so far off the rails that it looks like something that could and tastes like something that could support the life of a SCOBY for kombucha, then good for you,
Right.
And I think before we were recording, I started this by saying that a friend was relaying an anecdote from John Paul at Cameron, which is quite similar to Gideon, where his whole approach every year is just kind of like walking the vines. And again, this is how I remember the story, walking the vines, tasting grapes here and there, and really making these picking decisions based off of feel. And inevitably that is influenced, whether or not he realizes it, by being on his vineyard, for 30 years now, or however many, day
Right.
after day.
Right.
So he also is pulling from this deep bank of knowledge. And that is one thing, another one of my just gut reactions that I had when you were telling me about Gideon's approach, which is that is so cool. And that is not something I can possibly do, even if I wanted to, because I haven't been making wine since the 70s. I just don't, at least I find it hard to imagine that I could wake up tomorrow and be like, do you know what? I'm going to try on Gideon's style for size for the rest of my life. It would take me at least 15 vintages of doing that to really be able to have it in my bones and, in my hands enough to really meaningfully make a decision with that approach. So I think it's not only a matter of finding a style that works for you, but much like you said, you have to have that consistency year after year, and you might not actually really be able to engage with your approach or your style until you've been making wine for 10, 15, 20 years. You know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I'm sure that somebody would want to debate this with us, but I think
right.
that I think that there's really first of all, I just really appreciate the appreciation of experience. I think in so much in our modern life, I feel like just as people, it's like. It's not. I mean, when I say that, I think it's an American culture situation, a U.S. culture situation, where we really just cast aside age and experience. And I think in wine, it's one of those things that you just really highlighted beautifully. That is, growing with a piece of land, becoming, in tune with it, takes seasons and seasons, vintage after vintage after vintage, seeing all the variations and starting to see how your vines have adapted and changed over that
Right.
time, and how they react to the various weather changes that happen from season to season, and knowing based on what everything that's come this year, because you're working intimately in the vineyard
Right.
every year, almost every day of that year, every that of that growing season, then you kind of have this sense of where they are, and you can taste it,
Right.
and
Right.
you have a memory bank of comparative knowledge from all the
Right.
previous vintages that you've worked there, and can say, we're
Hmm.
there, we're pretty
Hmm.
close to there. This is like, we've got, we're in the range, let's do this kind of thing. And I,
Right.
I think that, yeah, absolutely. Like, how could,
Yeah.
I mean, I think about that, like, so as when I started my winery, I just felt like it's going to take me 3 to 5 years to just figure out the vineyards that I'm working with. I
Yeah.
realized really quick that I was like, I can just like say I want to pick at this bricks thing, but like, it's, especially when you're buying grapes and you don't get to do the farming yourself, it's really like I felt really hands behind my back and one eye blindfolded kind of thing,
Yeah.
and just like,
Yeah.
I have a target, but like, it's part speculation,
Right.
um and so
Right.
I like that. I really like that. And then the other thing I wanted to um go back to, you kind
Mm.
of surprised me in this sense of like, I hadn't considered it, and it's, in some ways it might just be the way that we're talking about it that this came up,
Hmm.
that but maybe this is something that you have more to say about. But I always
Mm.
think of natural wine as, and so many people talk about it completely opposite to what you said, which is like, you want to see the winemaker sitting in front of you. And so many
Hmm.
people talk about natural wine as like, they want to taste the unadulterated land that experience grew out of. You know what I mean? Like, and like
Yeah.
and it's almost like we're trying to minimize the extent that the winemaker becomes a filter to that. Like, we want
Yeah.
we really just want an unfiltered expression of this piece of the earth,
Right.
versus what you said, which is, I think, equally valid. But I think I would love to hear you expound a little
Yeah.
bit more.
Yeah. Well, so just a quick thought first, only because I'm noticing this now. I'm looking at my screen and I'm seeing whenever you talk, there's like the marks on this like moving line. I'm not
Yeah.
seeing that at all on mine. I just want to make sure you are actually hearing me and my audio is getting recorded
Oh
properly.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. In fact, it's the opposite for me. Like, mine, I
Oh,
don't
funny.
see. Yeah, like, I see
Oh,
mine.
weird. Okay.
I mean, I see mine
Yours is
very
just a flat
minimally.
line.
Yeah,
Okay.
I see mine very minimally. I mean, I can't even see it because
Huh.
I'm like, I have a bright window behind me now,
Okay.
so it's hard to
Perfect.
even see it.
Perfect.
But yes, like, yours is so big that I can see it. I
Okay.
do see mine
Okay.
now.
Great.
I shaded it, but it's very small.
Okay.
Yours is
Great.
like
I just
big, big, beautiful sound waves.
awesome. Just wanted to make sure.
Yeah, yeah,
So, anyways, yes, to answer your question, I think, whew, yeah, I have a lot of feelings about this. I guess the easiest place for me to start with, and I feel a tiny bit bad doing this because it comes from criticism, which is I feel like one of the tropes in natural wine is a natural winemaker gets out of the way and just lets the grapes do what they want, right? And
right.
to
Yeah,
me, that implies that there is no intervention and there is no intention, which is such a crock of shit. We wouldn't have wine without intervention. The whole reason wine comes to be is because we chose to put vines in the ground. And I'll even be really generous and say there's one winemaker I can think of in Georgia who I met years ago who only harvests grapes from these wild vines that he finds. But nonetheless, 99% of winemakers are making wine from grapes that were intentionally planted in a place. They were intentionally farmed. They were intentionally picked at a certain date. They were intentionally processed in a certain way. Yet they all still want you to believe, and all being hyperbole, of course, for the sake of this argument, that there is no intention, that you are only tasting the intent of the grape, what it just wants to be. And then you taste all of these wines that if you were poured blind, you would think that it could be like dog bowl water. I'm sorry to say. Like, and of course, that's not all of them. But so I think that this part where I really struggle with the identity of natural wine as it currently exists is that people are so far removed from the story, which is inherently problematic to me. Because, yes, it is very important that we're talking about the land in a meaningful way. We're talking about how we as people are engaging with it, caring for it, and hopefully putting something back into it, because all we do with winemaking in general is extract, extract, extract. Where are the people in that narrative? There's
Mm-hmm.
someone who is farming it year round. There was someone who is picking it year round. More often than not, unfortunately, someone who is incredibly marginalized and underpaid. And then there's the person who's actually doing the making and helping bottle and making all of that possible. I mean, that's countless, countless, countless people. And they are so often not part of the narrative. And I think to not include them is not only problematic, but it really does a disservice to what it is that you're imbibing. Um, and, like when I think of some of the greatest natural winemakers, like people who I really look up to, like the Demours as an example in Chablis. I could and have on numerous occasions blinded their wines because it is so uniquely them. And of course, part of that is Olivier's farming and Alice's like comically anal winemaking. But like, and I mean that as a compliment, like the precision that she approaches winemaking with is like kind of confounding, and humbling. And like, absolutely, you are tasting a place. But I think when this whole idea really grew into something that I could really get my head around and communicate to you now was when I tried one of their negociant wines for the first time. And this was, maybe in like 2016 bottling. They had like a bad crop, so they purchased some fruit from friends. I want to say it was in the Rhone, and it still tasted like their wine. Like it was undeniably something that came from their cellar. Sure, there were certain parts of it on like the mid palate that didn't quite have the same structure of acidity that, like their Chardonnay does. But like, the point that I'm making is like it still tasted like them, the maker, their intention, their style, their finesse, even though it was fruit that came from hundreds of miles away from where they're typically growing and producing, right? So I
Yeah.
think, like, again, that's just one case study, but I think that truly beautiful natural wine, if you really care to lean in and listen, whether or not you want to admit it, has the mark of the person who made it. Um, and sometimes it takes a lot of going back to the wines to really start to taste and see and understand how that influence is there. And I do think it's easier kind of in the case that I just gave as an example. And you can do that very easily in America, right? Like, think of the number of natural winemakers who in California who source from like 10 different AVAs, yet all of their wines still have a similar like Sousance, like a flair or flavor about them that I just like how could you think that there isn't some part of that at least that doesn't come from the person, So I think obviously, cellar culture, whatever the, dominant yeast strain is where you're making, like, of course, but I think there is something there that's just hard for me to shy away from. Um, and I
Yeah. I
think
mean,
that can be obfuscated by flaws or faults that come about from human error or, environmental factors that are outside of our control. But yeah, I think it's also a philosophical stance for me. I want there to be more discussion about all of the people that are involved. So, maybe I'll I'll play devil's advocate to the other side of the argument, and maybe I'm just looking for that to be there because I want to push the conversation about the people who are involved more.
well, I mean, I wanted to say I really appreciate that as well. Thank you for bringing that out. I think it's an important thing that I also try to emphasize, and
Hmm.
I think the way that I mean, I sort of approach it in a two pronged way. One of which is the
Mm.
way that you said, which is just the this community aspect that you mentioned, like how many
Mm,
hands actually are involved in this bottle that you get to taste,
right.
is so under represented and so
Hmm.
underspoken about.
Hmm.
Underspoken about, that's a new word.
We know what you're saying. Yeah.
The other thing is that just it's this idea that I think is the danger of an approach to natural wine. One of the sort of things that I hope we can find the nuance to avoid in natural wine, which
Hmm.
is the idea, this purity culture, and what it amounts to
Yes.
is it grows from the idea of human separation from nature, and it
Right.
and it and it says that human influence is a taint, and
Right.
of human equals bad, and not of human
Right.
equals good. And so, but if that is true, then
Hmm.
natural wine is an oxymoron,
Right.
because
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
so I yeah, and I really want us to stop seeing ourselves as separate from nature, and to
Yes.
rejoin our community that we've abandoned for so long. And
Right.
yeah, and if we do that, then like the possibilities that you just talked about all open up, and
Right.
that perspective is refreshed by human participation, and becomes beautiful because of it. So I think
Yeah.
thank you for saying that. It's
Yeah,
really nice.
absolutely. Well, and I think to, maybe appease the more science-minded, uh, you know, uh, technically versed people who are potentially listening to this, there have been countless studies carried out, um, and I can't remember the name of the author of it. Or when it was exactly, but there was the scientist who who essentially carried out a study of creating these cheeses, where they were inoculated with yeast cultures that were taken from swabs from various people. I think it was a ton of different lab assistants, and apologies, I might be getting part of this wrong, but like the basic idea is there. And they talk about the influence of all of these cheeses that came made from the same milk, from this that was gathered on the same day, but all these cheeses tasted wildly different because they were inoculated with yeast strains that came from people's different microbiomes. So
Yeah,
if you're to take that idea, like, when I make wine, it's I have my hands in it, my
yeah,
feet in it, like, quite literally. So
right.
my body, my microbiome is engaging with and influencing that ferment, whether or not I want to. And that has been quantified and studied. So that to me is just another way in which, like, how could you say that, to use the words that you use, that there's this like purity of nature in a
Mhm.
product that is based on life? Like,
Yeah, right.
wine is full of living things, some of which come from us, the people who are touching, picking, and engaging with this ferment while it's going through its life cycle. I'm only bringing it up to try to talk about so much of what we just touched on uh, in a more meaningful way, as I'm like watching all of these trends and different like talking points move through the natural wine industry. And I think this is one that I've wanted for so long. Like I would love to get to witness the ecperiodic heat death of the 0-0 movement. It's just so dumb, and it's
Well,
a dogma that feels like it's just as bad as parkerization. Um,
well, wait,
and
wait, wait. Before you,
sorry, yeah,
no, no. I want you to. I want to ask more about that.
yeah,
But
sure,
before
sure,
we
sure.
leave the topic, one thing that you did make me think about, and
Mm,
like, so let's put a pin in 0-0 as a
yeah.
thing that we're definitely going to return to.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
maybe we'll return to it quickly. But
Yeah,
the thing I'm bringing up, maybe you'll have something to say about as well, which is
yeah, sure.
it's more a comment that you're on what you were talking about, to further your point, which is as somebody who tries to read peer-reviewed studies, or just
Mm,
any kind of study that's like actually trying to take science seriously,
hmm. Hmm.
um, you start to notice these. I look at things philosophically. I came into the world philosophically
Hmm.
before science, and then science after philosophy, and so I think I
Hmm.
have that approach to everything. And
Hmm. Hmm.
I read these studies, and it starts to just become this thing where you're just like, you read, like, let's say it's a whatever, like I read 6 paragraphs, and within each paragraph there's like every statement, it has a little parenthetical citation at the end of it because it's a
Right.
fact making statement. And I'm like,
Right.
I just start to realize, like, for me to even verify this study's findings, I need to like
Hmm.
verify every single study in that is being cited in each
Yeah.
paragraph. And it becomes
Right.
this like ad infinitum, like
Right.
retrogressive, because those studies are going to have cited studies and those studies will
Right.
have cited studies. And you're
Hmm.
just sort of like, at a certain point, like, nobody really has the time to do that. And
Right.
we can all support our points to a certain extent. I mean, obviously
Right.
but we can all support points, or we hopefully will find something to support our points
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
legitimately. But it becomes,
Hmm.
but we know that science has progressed, and that means that
Right.
throughout history, every one of those cited studies has been wrong in some way. And
Right.
so, and
Right.
so, to think that we've arrived because we have this amazing, like cited, peer-reviewed new study that shows hard data is kind of absurd when you think about it. Like, when you look at,
Yeah.
like, in the context of the history of science, it's like, yeah, I mean, great. Like, we've taken the next step, maybe,
Right.
and
Right.
now we have to do the hard work of breaking that step down and showing how it's wrong, and where its
Right. Yeah.
limitations are, and then we can
Yeah.
take the next step, which might not be in the same direction. It might be a lateral step, because we realize there were
Right.
so many, missed points in this step, and so, yeah,
Hmm.
it's, I mean, and that's how I came to philosophy, was like trying to, prove the existence of God, because I was religious, and I was like
Mm.
a kid who
Mm.
was like philosophically like engaged in apologetics, and what I started to realize was, like, every proof for the existence of God had later been questioned and, sort of dismantled by another philosopher, and
Right.
then who raised other, and that led to better argumentation, which then led to better questioning. And at a certain point I realized, like, oh, the questioning just never ends.
Hmm.
Yeah, like,
Hmm.
it's an endless process of, yeah, the whole dialectic process.
Right. Right.
So
Which really, everything that you just said takes us back to where we started, which is there is validity in any and every approach as long as it is one that you believe in and consistently engage with.
yeah, yeah, and so, let's take this to 00, and
Mm.
what's so do you make? Let's start with that. Do you make 00 wines? I mean, I
No.
know. Okay,
No.
so
I
when
mean,
that,
I have quite a bit in my career. I have tried at times for myself, and this is where, like, I made a comment earlier that I think one of the most kind of insulting things I can do as a winemaker is to allow something to fall apart when it is perfectly within my means to keep something sound in a way that respects all of the people who made that bottle of wine possible. And that is obviously, like, filled with my subjective understanding of what is good or bad taste.
right,
We can
what
take that and appreciate that,
what does fall apart
because
mean? Right.
like, if let's say I started by making a Chardonnay, and like maybe Wente clone. I'm just trying to think of something that has like a pretty noticeable, or sorry, not Wente, Musqué clone, something that has like a very noticeable and distinct aromatic profile, right?
Mm, mm,
And then by the time it gets to bottle, you taste vinegar and Brett. There's no there's no aromatic complexity or depth that would tell you that it was ever musque. That's what I mean by fall apart. And I think that
yeah.
there are more than enough tools in the toolbox, even if your only tool is sulfur,
Yep.
to maintain the integrity and focus of that wine. And again, that's where I say, like, that is filled with my subjective idea of what is good or bad taste, or what is like clarity versus something that has fallen apart. And I truly if you are someone who really enjoys the taste of a white wine with 2.3 grams per liter VA, good for you. I really do mean that genuinely. For me, it does absolutely nothing. I
Yeah.
don't want a wine that is that heavily marred, or that's too harsh of a word. I don't want a wine that is that heavily influenced by microbiology. I want it to taste like fruit. I want it to taste like the place that it came from and the person who made it. I want it to have a pleasing balance, you know.
Can I?
And
I
yes, yeah, please.
so a couple things, even within the 0-0 realm.
Mm, mm,
I I th- I think the other like this purity essence and the dogma really
mm,
ignores, well, I mean, a couple things. So it
mm,
ignores so much more important elements to winemaking that are impactful in the world. But let's leave that
right.
aside for now. But
Mm,
the other thing that it ignores is like so many 0-0 people, and this is not true across the board, but I would say there
right.
is partly true that so many 0-0 people employ many technologies that don't
Mm,
add or remove anything from the wine, but are
mm,
modern technologies that are fossil fuel based, that are like
mm, mm,
really, like to
mm,
create, whether it's dry ice or just a
mm,
tank of CO2 that you can cover
mm,
the must with. You're not adding
mm,
anything, but like that is not, like it is definitely employing like outside forces and things for stability, temperature
right.
control. I
Right.
mean, you know what I mean? If you
How
think
are
like,
you powering temperature control? Exactly.
right, like
Yes.
are you, are
Yes.
you fermenting in a cool area? Are you aging in a cool area? You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Like we all want to
Yes.
do that, but it's like, why
Yes.
doesn't that fall within the realm of,
Right.
you know something that is, yeah,
Exactly.
like, look, if we're going natural, if like that's the ethos, if 0-0,
Right.
like why not go, like it's, if it's 90 degrees, then you're fermenting at 90 degrees, like, too
Right.
bad, you know.
Yeah, exactly. And this is where, like, I want to be abundantly clear. I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with 0-0 wines. One of my
Yeah,
colleagues and friends
I
here,
don't either.
Junichi Fujita makes some of the most beautiful 0-0 wines I have ever had. And it works for him. And that's great. I don't I don't want it as another form of dogma where it is the end of the conversation. So, like, much to all of the points that you just made, so many of these natural winemakers are still employing different things, different technologies, different products that are, at the end of the day, detrimental to the environment. But they get to stand a step above us with their arms crossed and their heads held high because they are able to say, well, I made 0-0 wine. There's no sulfur. There was nothing added, nothing removed.
Right.
And I'm supposed to think that that's better? How much did you pay your staff? How much of the labor that you had during harvest was free because it was a quote unquote cool experience for them? Do people understand how that devalues so much labor that people don't have a choice but to take at a criminally low wage? So I,
Yeah.
I just think, like, that's more what I mean. I think the dogma of 0-0 and this idea that there's some sort of like moral high ground associated with it is just such a fallacy, and it's detrimental to everything that so many people have worked very hard to do and push for, which is, better farming practices and asking questions about how things are made, just for there to be more transparency in the whole process. Um,
Yeah, I'm
so
also,
yeah.
like, I mean, I know that you mentioned something about like waiting for things to get to the right, or phenological development is like a
Hmm.
sort of, maybe that's an unnecessary, like, go on taste, go, what's whatever.
Hmm.
Like,
Right.
but I also, I mean, I've been toying with this idea maybe for a while now, that like, you know, natural wine is something that is really, there's like, it's just a different ball game when you're making natural wine in Quebec versus like a 0-0 wine in Quebec versus Los Angeles. You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
like
Yeah.
you just have so many advantages in Quebec. Like, I'm sorry, like it's so much easier to make natural wine in Quebec, a 0-0 wine in Quebec, because
Yeah.
you've got freezing temperatures at harvest. You've got super high acid grapes. You know what I mean? Like, you have
Yeah.
like so many things going for you. Whereas like in California, it's like if I want to get to ripeness, I'm going to have pHs at 4, you know what I mean? Like,
Right.
and
Right.
I mean, depending on the grape, of course, like there's all
Yeah.
kinds of
Yeah.
variables there, but like, and then
Hmm.
I'm going to be fermenting in really hot temperatures, where like, if I have to,
Right.
if I have to like move the grape 2 hours from a vineyard to a winery, they can start
Right.
fermenting. They can start turning into VA, like it's like,
Yeah.
like at harvest, it's like 100 degrees sometimes, it's like really
Yeah.
not, it's the opposite of conducive to natural wine. And then you're
Yeah.
expected to be held to the same standards. And I'm not trying to make apology for myself. I'm just saying, like, it's because I'm not even making wine. I haven't made wine for the last, in a commercial way, in the last 2 vintages. So
Right.
I'm
Right.
more just, it's more just a thought that I've had where it's like, yeah, like, okay, but we're not all looking at the same zone. And then you have,
Right.
and I would say that you end up with craziness at that point if you're not allowed
Yes.
to adjust, because you're in Central California, or you're in the Bay Area, you're in like Lodi,
Right.
getting fruit from Lodi or something like that. It's like that fruit, unless you got a really special space, with really old vines that somehow are hanging on to acid, which some old vines will do. Like,
Right.
you are being very risky. Like, you're
Yeah.
taking much more risk on than somebody in Oregon, for example, in a cool part of Oregon,
Right.
like the Van Duzer corridor or something like that, where it's
Right.
like, or wherever. Um,
Right.
that it's just, and yet you're held to the same standard of like, oh,
Exactly.
anyway.
Well, and this is where it's so funny because I feel like so much of what natural wine was originally pushing against was recipe winemaking, right?
Yes.
Like
Yep.
that the way to do it is to have this finished alcohol, which maybe means you're adding sugar and then you're adding water and you're adding acid to like create this perfect, quote unquote, perfect semblance of what you
Right.
want the finished product to be. It needs to have
Right.
this percentage of oak from this forest, from this cooperage. Everything that we just outlined, I feel like shows how natural winemaking has just become another form of recipe winemaking. And much to
Mm,
your point, like if you're trying to tell me, you're being like a imaginary person, that I have to follow these rules in order to be considered natural wine, but to use your example, you're in Quebec and I'm in LA. Are you fucking kidding me? Like it's not reasonable to assume that I am going to be operating within the same chemical parameters and have the same wine matrix that allows me to have a 0-0 wine in the way that you can. And like when I was working at this place in California, um, yeah, it was somewhat dogmatic. We got like Valley Floor Marsan Roussan. And oh my God, I just remember looking at the sample analyses a couple of weeks leading up to the pick, and it was like 17 bricks and 4.2 pH. I'm just like, what are we supposed to do with this? Like, come on.
right.
And then it comes in, and I'm told, well, I'm only able to add 20 parts of sulfur. And I just kind of was like, why? We might as well just not add any. That is going
Right.
to have
Right.
zero effect.
Right.
And
Right.
kind of and again, I'm paraphrasing, this wasn't exactly what was said, but it was kind of like, well, but that's how much we use. And there was certainly some fruit we brought in that harvest where, yeah, that was more than enough sulfur. It was, immaculately farmed Chardonnay by Steve Mathiasen that like, you know, amazing ripeness and still had a pH of like 3.0. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, let's do it for that. That makes sense.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I think that's where I just like don't understand what we're trying to do or say anymore. It's become another recipe, you know? So
Well,
Anywho,
this is a really fun discussion about natural wine.
yeah.
I didn't know what we were going to talk about, but this is
Yeah,
great.
me neither. I assumed we were going to spend a lot of time talking about hybrids, which we still probably should. But yeah,
We
I'm
should.
glad
So,
I'm glad we're talking about this. Yeah.
yeah, that was my segue to Leon Milo.
Oh, perfect. Perfect. Yeah.
Well, so you should talk about all the grapes that you are farming and making
Yeah.
wine with.
Yeah. So I have two sites that I farm. Uh, one I farm by myself. The other I farm with a colleague of mine, Lizzie Fratman from Lanyap Wines. And that site that we farm together is just north of White Salmon in a small town called Hewsome. And that's all head trained, own rooted Riesling that was planted in 73, I want to say. Pretty
Wow.
fascinating site, sits at like 1,000 feet. It's the upper part of the vineyard is all like pretty steep, which is my way of saying pretty much everything has to be done by hand.
Yeah.
Um,
How
so
big?
like all sprays, it's pretty tiny. It's only 2 acres,
Yeah, that's good though.
which
That's a nice.
which thank God, because I think if I had to backpack spray anything larger than that, there's not enough food in the world for me to not lose 20 pounds during the growing season. But yeah, so really fascinating site. There's a lot of stuff that needs to be worked on there. There's a good amount of trunk disease. There's a lot of misses. So we're still in like a rehab phase with that site, but it's incredibly promising, and produces really beautiful fruit. And then the other site that I farm is down in Canby, so quite opposite directions of one another. Canby, for those who are unaware, is about 40 minutes south of Portland. So it's kind of the north end of the Willamette Valley, and very much a part of the valley that most people in the world would not actually associate with grapes or, kind of like noble wines in any way. Uh,
Uh-huh.
but it's a tiny vineyard that was planted by this guy, Dave Ward, who's a just phenomenal human being with a really gigantic heart. He planted this vineyard in 2000 entirely to a French American hybrid called Leon Mio, which was developed in Alsace in the early 1900s, a cross of Gold Riesling and actually Meurdet Grasset 101 14, which is a rootstock that is very commonly used it, in Oregon, California, a lot of different grape growing areas in the States.
Yeah. What?
But so yeah, he spent, I think he told me, like a good 20 years experimenting with a bunch of friends, one of whom I'm pretty sure is Lon Rombau,
Yeah.
who wrote that, like
The
kind of,
organic wine growers
yeah,
guide
yeah,
or
the
something.
grape grower, yeah, like that guide to kind of like home or homestead viticulture. But yeah, they experimented with a ton of different hybrid varieties and eventually landed on this one as being kind of like the best, both in terms of how it grows and behaves in our climate, but also in terms of the wines that come from it. So pretty special site. Since it was planted, it has never once been sprayed with sulfur, because it more or less has complete resistance to powdery mildew here. So, when I talk about what it is to engage with sustainable farming practices, that to me is like a pretty meaningful way to actually do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
um, so, yeah, I have those two sites that I handle the farming for.
And that,
And then in addition to that, I have a site down in Elkton, Oregon, which is about an hour southwest of Eugene, one of the newer kind of smaller AVAs in Oregon.
now we're
Um,
southwest of Eugene.
mhm.
So warmer climate? Like, are you getting
It's
down to like the
interesting.
Roseburg area? Like,
Yeah, so it's not far from Roseburg,
okay.
and it's technically the north end of the Umpqua Valley. But when you go to at least this vineyard, actually, honestly, all of Elkton, to me it feels like the Willamette Valley. Like it's pretty cool where it sits in this little valley right up against a river. I feel like no matter what day of the year you go there, there's always kind of like a deep fog and mist in the morning.
Uh,
Um, So it is actually like a surprisingly cool area given how far south it is. Um, so it's a small vineyard called Tuckaway that's farmed by Nathan Wood, who is the farmer of Johann Vineyard.
Oh
And
yeah.
he's actually a third generation grape grower with roots going back to Napa. His family owned what's it called, Freemark Abbey for a number of years, and also
Sure.
had a
Yeah.
pretty prolific vineyard management company there. So yeah, feel pretty fortunate to get to be a part of that place. I've been working with it since my first vintage for this project, which was 2022. And so from there, I source Chenin, Chardonnay, Pinot Blanc, and Milan de Bourgogne. And most of what I make from there is traditional method sparkling wine, though I am this year actually was the first year that the Chenin ripened to a point where it was actually suitable for a still wine. So this will be my first year producing a varietal still Chenin from there, which I'm pretty excited about. And
So
then,
yeah. Go
yeah,
ahead.
sorry. Oh,
No.
the last one. I'm hoping this will be a year after year thing, but this was my first year purchasing some fruit from another good friend of mine who farms 3 Mile Vineyard, which is out in the Dalles, so closer to where I actually make wine in Mosier. But I purchased some Cab Sav from him this year. It's always been a dream of mine to make Cab like from that area of the gorge since I started making wine in Oregon. So hopefully it'll prove to be a good and compelling site and something that'll continue for years to come.
Yeah, that sounds great. I mean,
Mhm.
I think you just need time with Cab.
Yeah,
uh,
exactly. Yeah.
um, so it sounds like mostly whites, other than Leon and the Cab, the
Yes.
new Cab. Nice.
Hmm. Hmm.
Uh,
Yeah.
and so the Leon, it's growing. Is that also in the gorge? You said 40 minutes, but then I forget if you
Oh,
said
sorry. No, south of Portland. So that is the
south.
Willamette
Okay,
Valley.
it is.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Okay.
Hmm. 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 Yeah, and actually, funny enough, this year, like the 24 was my first year working with that variety, and I just made a still red wine. Um, but this year and every year following until I run out of ideas, my hope is to always make a still red, but then have one experiment, for lack of a better term, one different like style or approach to handling the fruit and vinifying it to see what it wants to be and how to best like showcase that site and the variety. Because it's not something that's widely worked with. There's not a ton of commercially available varietal bottlings of it. Like I, as a winemaker, don't have a ton to go off of. So like the still red wine tastes great, but maybe it actually wants to be kind of like an oxidative rosé a la, Viña Tondoña or Lopez de Heredia.
Mm,
Maybe. I don't know.
mm.
But so this year I picked a small portion and did direct press for a traditional method sparkling, um, just to see. Like it might be great, it might be bad.
That's
um,
great. Well,
so
I
yeah,
will just say, from my experience, aged and ageable rosés are uh, grossly overlooked. They are phenomenal. Like
yeah.
I have a 2020 that I just opened that I was like, damn, I was right. This is really freaking good.
What was it made
Unfortunately,
from?
all this one's all Grenache,
Cool. Oh
and it
yeah,
yeah, and it was I mean, it's lovely. It's yeah. I mean,
yeah,
it's one. I mean, it's just one of those things. You're like, we do this with whites. Think about
yeah.
Grand Cru Chardonnay from Beaune.
Hmm.
It's like from
Hmm.
Montrachet or something. Like we're like, these are aged, beautiful things. But like, you could
Right.
achieve maybe even a little bit more if you had a little
Mm.
bit of skin contact from something. You know what I mean? Like it's
Right.
the same
Yeah.
idea.
Yeah.
Like it's
Yeah.
just that age obviously helps. It's just that the market is all about like a quick cash flow product, a pink fun
Yeah.
thing, and unfortunately, like I think we're missing out. Unfortunately, for
Yeah.
those of us who try not to miss out, like you can't sell it.
Yeah.
So
Exactly.
people are like, "Wait, it's
Yeah.
4 years old? Like we're on the 25s now. Like I don't know what you're talking about."
Yeah. I
Um,
know.
yeah. So anyway, beware. But also,
Hmm.
make a small amount because it's amazing.
Yeah, exactly.
Um, the all right. So I mean, so the Malone, like, why did they plant those? Were they just what were like the
Y-
Malone and the Pinot Blanc and Chenin and stuff like that? Is it just it's a region where
y-
they weren't as tied to things, so they were trying different things, or did they know that
Oh,
they?
100%. I
Yeah,
mean, it's funny. I've never actually talked to Nathan about why he picked the varieties that he did and picked the clonal selections of Chardonnay that he did for that site because they have three different clones there.
nice.
Um, yeah, it's I or maybe I have at some point and I actually just can't remember. But yeah, I'll have to circle back to him and then get back to you. But at least part of it is like you said, it's a relatively new AVA. Like there certainly have been some established wineries there for quite some time, but that is also just the beauty of pretty much everywhere in America, period. Like,
Right.
sure, you associate Cab with Napa, but at the end of the day, no one's really going to bat an eye if you plant Riesling there, which some people have, and it's quite fucking phenomenal in my opinion. Like
Amazing.
we can kind of do whatever the heck we want. So a lot of it for Nathan was just that. Um,
And
he's and in having like subsequent conversations with him, I think a lot of it is like trying to think about what might do well in years to come. Like Shannon, in my mind, is a brilliant choice for that area because as our climate continues to warm and warm and warm, we're inevitably going to get closer and closer to a point where you really can have Shannon in the Willamette Valley or the north end of the Umpqua in that like relatively cold site and have it be something that like achieves really good appropriate ripeness for a varietal bottling.
right. Well, so I mean, do you? I know you're not farming that one. Of course, I'm going to
Mm.
pick on that one to ask about the
Hmm.
farming, but I do want to ask about the Riesling as well. But do you know? I mean, because these are just varieties that you don't hear that much about. I don't know that much about.
Hmm.
Any. I'm just curious if you've heard anything about like how they perform in the vineyard. In relation to like
Yeah,
Chardonnay, which is notoriously susceptible to things just like Pinot Noir is. Like how does
yeah,
Chenin Pinot Blanc Malone do? And Riesling,
yeah.
I
Well,
hear is tough too. So if you want to talk about your own experiences with Riesling,
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, my honest answer is I don't think there is a simple catch-all that I could give you because I do think so much of it is so site specific,
sure.
and also like rootstock specific and clonal specific. Um, so like when I was uh, working at Bow and Arrow years ago, we used to work with some Shannon from this spot uh, in I want to say it was in Junction City, so like pretty much the south end of the like proper Willamette Valley, so just north of this site in Elkton that I mentioned. Um, and oh my god, it was just awful. Like the fruit was just so sad, like just sour rot, not good botrytis, like just falling
Mm,
apart. And it would like one year we got it to 17 and a half bricks and we're just like thrilled, you know. Um, so that's one example. But then the Shannon at this site, this I mean, 22 when I first worked with it, yeah, there was a tiny bit of botrytis. There was maybe a tiny bit of sour rot, but within reason, given like, the poorly timed rains that we had coming up against harvest, and also just like, yeah, that site, the vines still kind of, they were quite young at that time, still kind of finding their footing, as it were. But it's gotten better and better and better every year. And this year, it was the most beautiful fruit I have ever seen come from that vineyard.
mm,
And this was Shannon that had been through two pretty recent rains, like really heavy rains. And they just did a phenomenal job managing it. Um, they used there's this organic approved spray called ProBlad that's derived from lupine seeds, that mitigates a lot of the uh,
yes. Yeah. Yeah.
potential for botrytis, sour rot, powdery
Yeah.
mildew, and they just had really good timing with that. And I think I went down to go look at the vineyard 2 days after they had a really heavy rain, like close to a half an inch. And I saw like the tiniest bit of splitting and no sign of rot whatsoever. So I
Oh,
think, part of why I say I don't think there's a catch-all is like that instance, like that was fruit that was really put through the ringer and could have gone incredibly off the deep end if it wasn't managed by such a deft hand, you know?
yeah, yeah,
Um, and same with the Chardonnay there, perfect. Like all of the fruit there this year, it was the best that site has ever looked. So I think it really depends. I think it depends on site. I think it depends on who's managing it, farming it, how they're farming it, how attentive they are. Um,
right. Yeah.
yeah, it really varies. And,
How so?
again, to that point of, the person and the place really
Right.
heavily influencing what the fruit looks like the Riesling site, um, it's very windy. Um, I don't really take the time to like, you look at some uh, videos of people working with head trained vines and they're like tying up all of the shoots into this nice little bundle at the top of the vine to shield all of the,
Yeah,
delicate white clusters. I don't do that. And I'll be completely honest. Part of that is just like time and being spread thin. Like, not in a
yeah.
million years could I have gone and tied up every single one of those vines if I wanted to. But also, just by subjecting them to that level of wind pressure, I think we actually did ourselves a favor and we created quite resilient fruit. Because
Sure. Yeah.
barring like these two kind of odd sections where there's some underground water channeling that causes just like kind of rank, vigorous growth, we had pristine fruit. I sprayed sulfur twice this season. The rest were just like biologicals and other micro and macronutrients that are meant to kind of like holistically increase the plant's immune system and ability to ward off powdery. Um, but yeah, it was like a small handful of vines that ended up having some sour rot, and that was partly again because of how vigorous they were, and there were two like pretty ill-timed rain events that happened pretty close to harvest, and um, I didn't put on my smart farmer hat and go out and spray something like ProBlad, you know. Um, but I was really kind of impressed. Like the fruit was very strong and resilient through, some pretty bad heat events and relatively high humidity and on paper high disease pressure at this site, meaning for powdery, and yeah, it was really no problem. So I think my takeaway with a lot of these varieties is, if we want to buy this narrative of certain things really not being well suited to our environment here, really we have to actually ask, is it more a matter of them not being managed well?
Yeah. Good
You
point.
know,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Site goes so far, variety goes so far,
Hmm.
farming.
Yeah. I mean, like I had the good fortune of meeting Alice and Olivier when I was working with a friend of mine in the Jura a few years ago, the Demours. And I remember sitting with Olivier, and he was asking me, he's like, "So tell me about Oregon. Tell me about the soils." And I like kind of felt embarrassed talking about them because I unfortunately have, at least at the time, bought into this notion of like, oh, well, you're in Chablis. It's like all limestone soils. It's like the quote unquote best, it's what we all want. And I kind of looked at him. I was like, oh yeah, they're not so good. And he looked at me. He was like kind of pissed, and he was like, no, there's no such thing as bad soils. Only such thing as bad farming.
Yeah.
And I was just really struck by that in the moment. And it's absolutely true. Like, there is no such thing as bad soils. It's just how you, as the farmer, approach working with them and working with the crops that you're putting in them.
So, how, speaking of crops that you're putting in the soil, how's Leon?
Oh,
Mia.
man.
Were you the one that
Leon
was
Mio.
telling? Were you the one that pointed out the fact that the breeder who bred Leon Mio named all of his grapes two names, like after people? So if you come across a two name grape. Like it's this all from like so Marichal Foch and Lucy Coleman, they're all like the same breeder basically.
Oh, so funny. No, I definitely didn't point that out to you, but I love knowing that.
Yeah.
Um,
So
Funny. No, no.
yeah. That's like
Yeah, and
that's
what God, what was his name? It's like on the tip of my tongue. It starts with an E. But yeah, it was the guy at Colmar in Alsace. Yeah,
yeah.
funny.
I'll look it up.
Yeah, it's I love it. I mean, I think it's quite fascinating to grow. Um, I don't know. I don't consider myself a farmer. I think I'm learning how to farm. I consider myself a winemaker. I feel like I've earned through a lot of blood, sweat, tears, and thrown out backs. I've earned that title. But I partly say that because I don't know that I can really meaningfully speak to what it is to farm Leon Mio, partly because I really only have one full season of doing so under my belt. So I'm really still trying to understand how it behaves in the vineyard and try to differentiate between what is the kind of inherent qualities of it versus what is being influenced by the various parameters that are there at this site. Um, so I think like when we were talking last week, I mentioned that the outer rows are kind of what you would picture, at least anecdotally, uh, and expect from hybrids, which is just like crazy vigor, just like they look like gigantic hedges, just like overflowing with rank growth that you cannot control no matter what you try to do. I think those outer rows I went through and I had to have shoot thinned like 6 times.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just absurd. Um, there was one row I tried just tucking all of the shoots, hoping that maybe that would discourage laterals from pushing, and that didn't matter. I mean, I've just like there was no way to keep up with it at a certain point. But then you move into the center of the vineyard, and I'm assuming this is just to do with soil compaction, but it's kind of what you would want for shoot growth by conventional terms. It's like just perfect, nice, and like the appropriate number of leaves for clusters. They're not like growing all over the place. They actually stop at some point, and then the plants put their energy into fruit, nice and balanced, and then you go a couple rows over and everything's short and stunted. So there's certain things going on at this vineyard that I think are far more complex than just what are the
Mm.
inherent qualities of the vine themselves.
Well, that's
So ask me again in 4 years and I might have a better, more educated answer for you. But in terms of actually working with it in the cellar, it's pretty phenomenal because as far as I can tell, it's quite versatile. um, like I said, I kind of brought in 2 different lots from my vineyard this year. One was a small amount direct press for traditional method sparkling,
uh-huh.
and the other is just for like a skin still red. Um, and the only challenge with working with this variety is that it's really prone to pretty wild pH shifts,
Oh.
and really
In
prone to oxidation.
oh.
And it's interesting because it's not just a matter of it dropping acidity, which it does, um, but it is like it has to have something to do with potassium solubility or instability because like I had this year, luckily I took a breather and actually did like a juice panel, and then last week I also had kind of like an end of fermentation panel done, and the TA has hardly shifted,
Okay.
but the pH has gone up like crazy
Really?
for my still red. Yeah, and again, like I'm not made of money, unfortunately, so I can't afford more complex analyses at ETS that would maybe shed a tiny bit more meaningful light onto why this is happening. But
Right.
I with Leon, because I've actually worked with it at another place, so I had like a bit more experience with it, and found that like picking it for still red, you wanted to do right about 3.2 pH, um, at least from this site. So picked it at 3.2, and this end of fermentation panel showed like 3.85 as the finished pH, and it's still not
Dang.
fully through mallow, but it's
Wow.
still holding a TA that's only like, a gram off of what it was when I picked it.
Huh.
So it's like a tiny bit confounding, and it is entirely possible that some of that is lab error.
I was
There is
gonna
like
say,
a
I was
there
gonna
is a
say,
you know
I wonder if I just thought of this. I'd never done it, but like, what a fun experiment it would be to send 3 vials of the exact same juice for
yeah,
analysis and label them with different, whatever little, codes, so
yeah.
that they think that they're getting different juice.
Oh yeah,
That would
yeah.
be
It's funny.
fun.
I've actually never thought of that, but yeah, I think like most labs will tell you that the acceptable margin of error is 5% for
Yeah.
most analyses, depending on if it's direct or indirect method. But so it's even when you were to build that in, I'm still looking at this number and I'm like, fuck, I kind of don't understand this. So yeah, it's quite confounding. But yeah, so it's funny because it is so prone to oxidation and these like relatively large pH shifts. The benefit is, if I'm purely thinking from a business perspective, the benefit is that you kind of get to have like a still red wine that is produced and put out into the market on the same timeline as a rosé.
Yeah.
So it's like it's really helpful, just from that perspective, to have a variety in your tool chest that like,
Not of all rosé.
yeah. Exactly. So like it's kind of interesting. But really the world is the oyster with it, because again, I'm like, tasting this base for what will be a sparkling wine, and it tastes compelling and interesting. It's got beautiful acidity and structure, and then I taste the red wine that I, pressed a week and a half ago, just barreled down, and it's also like quite phenomenal and interesting. It's like there's varietal characteristics in both of them, but they seem to be balanced in a way that respects the end goal and finished product that is going to come from each one. So like, much in the same way that Pinot, when you direct press for sparkling, there is still some varietal characteristic, but toned down enough where it wouldn't be like so overpowering in a champagne.
Yeah.
Uh, Versus like when you do it on its skins, it has everything there that you want, just turned up to 11, as it were. So yeah,
Huh.
it's interesting, but again, like I'm still pretty early on in my adventure with this variety, so I can't really like speak to it in a meaningful Gideon-esque kind of way. Um,
Well,
hopefully one day, but yeah, really the only challenge with it is just trying to find this happy balance of um, maintaining acidity while getting enough ripeness. And I should clarify, when I say that it's really prone to dropping acidity, I mostly meant on the vine as well. Um,
oh, okay.
yeah, so like yes, absolutely, obviously, like during ferment and aging, as well as I outlined with those examples of the pre and post chemical analysis. But like just as an example, this year, I'm just pulling up my calendar here so I can get these dates right for this example. So my sparkling pick for Leon Mio was August 19th, and it was pretty damn perfect. It was, like 19, like
Great.
2.9 pH, and like the
Wow.
flavor was right, the acid was right, tasting grapes off the vine, like it felt good. Chemical parameters seemed perfect, and then 7 days later, is that right? God, that still just seems crazy looking at this. Yeah, 7 days later, I picked it and it was at 22 and a half and 3.2.
That sounds
So
nice
like,
too for a red. Like,
yeah,
or yeah,
perfect.
right.
Perfect. But again, like just, point being like
Yeah.
that shift happened pretty damn fast.
Yeah.
And that's what I recall last year as well when I was going out to do sampling. Like overnight, that pH jump was like pretty drastic.
Yeah. That's
Um,
crazy.
yeah, so that's been an interesting thing to try to work with and figure out how to manage.
Hmm.
Especially knowing that once you get it into the cellar, you're going to see another like pretty gigantic shift.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
3.2 to 3.8 is crazy. Like
yeah,
I would say like 3.2 to 3.5. I'd be like, yeah, great. But
yeah,
you add another, wow, zero point 0.3 is
yeah,
insane.
yeah. But again, like I'm looking at the TA and it's like 6.5.
Yeah,
So it's kind of confounding.
that is wild.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah,
I mean, I
yeah.
wonder. I mean, did you get your malic tested to know what your malic, like how many grams you had?
Yeah, I have that written down somewhere. I can't
I mean,
remember off the top of my head.
was it like an incredibly high number? Is that part of
No,
why the pH jumped? Wow.
no,
Oh,
it really wasn't. With the sparkling, it was a bit higher.
okay.
Um, but
As
yeah,
to be
just within
expected.
that
Yeah.
one,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. But within that 1 week, no, it was actually
Huh.
it dropped out quite a bit. Yeah,
Huh.
again, like thanks to within that like week time between those two picks, there was another like pretty prolonged heat event. I think we were like high 90s pretty much every day within that week. So
That is amazing. Hmm.
yeah, yeah.
This Riesling, I when I worked at Piscinus Ranch, there was a really old Riesling vineyard right
Mm.
at the edge of the ranch that is known, and I can't remember. I can't remember the name of the vineyard. Does that ring a bell to you? It's in San Benito County down there.
I can't say it does.
Oh,
No, I'm unfortunately a tiny bit unfamiliar with that
area.
area.
Yeah, most
Yeah, I
people
just didn't
are.
spend as much time. Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
it's funny. It's very historic in terms of, I mean, California, some of California's still oldest, still producing wine commercially. Vineyards
Mm.
are right
Hmm.
there, and it's like, I mean, once one of the largest wine growing regions in California. Almaden
Hmm.
was there. I mean, it's very historic as far as, and part of that is like it's breezy and dry, so it's
Right.
very easy to grow grapes there as long as you have water, which we have less and less of. But yeah, head trained Riesling there, little vineyard similar to the one that you described there in
Hmm.
Oregon.
Cool.
Yeah, really cool, special stuff.
Hmm.
What with the old vines like that, with the old Riesling, do you
Hmm.
see any difference in terms of? I mean, I don't know if you have a comparative experience working with other younger Riesling vines, but just in terms
Hmm.
of like chemistries or behaviors in general.
Yeah, I have some. Unfortunately, not like the hugest bank of memories to pull from with Riesling. But the one thing that I've noticed at this site in particular is it will not drop acid.
Wow,
Like it will hold on to it week after week after week after week. So
that's
it's funny. We had a very small crop from the site this year. I pruned back incredibly heavy. The like when I went out at the beginning of this year just to look at the vines and think about how I wanted to approach pruning, there was just like pretty poor growth to work with from the previous year. So everything kind of told me that the vines needed a tiny bit of a hard reset.
hmm,
Um, so pruned everything back pretty far off of the whole vineyard, whole 2 acres. We got 2/3 of a ton. So very, very, very low. Um, but so looking at what still was there, um, it just kind of screamed to be sparkling. Because I think over like, I'm trying to remember exactly the full length of samples I was taking. It was probably a 5 week period. I saw like a tenth of a point shift in the pH.
oh,
So it just kind of held at 2.9.
that is wild.
Sugar was moving up nicely, and as you would expect, and the pH just like refused to shift. And I'm only using pH as the metric here because we didn't take the time to do a juice panel on this one. So um, I don't know for sure what the balance of acids was in that. Um, but that's the main thing there, and I'd assume that has something to do with deep root systems and the way that it's engaging with groundwater at that time of the year because we don't irrigate. I suppose we could if we really wanted to. There is water access there, but it would be such a nightmare. Um, So it's really just the vines pulling with, whatever tiny bit of water is actually left at that point in the year, because it's quite dry. Um, we pretty much go to brown ground by like June 1st during the growing season.
Sure. Yeah.
So again, it's kind of just speculation. I in no way pretend to be a soil scientist, or like I said, a incredibly well-versed farmer. But that's just kind of my guess and gut feeling.
Now,
And again, especially experiencing, like, my only real time working with Riesling was in California, and it was actually pretty much polar opposite. It was 5-year-old vines, I think. But that's also
right.
such an unfair point of comparison. Like, vines at that stage in their life have no idea who they are yet or what they are trying to be. So it's almost not like a fair metric to compare against.
Yeah,
Year
good point.
5, you could have something where it's like, you're picking at 20 bricks and your pH is 3.6, and the next year you're 20 bricks and it's 2.4. Like,
Right, right.
so it's just a tiny bit too early. Yeah.
Well, jumping back to Leon,
Hmm.
Eugene Coleman, I think, is the name that we were trying to think.
Yes. Yeah. That sounds
Which would
right.
make sense. I think he named it after
Hmm.
one of his varieties after his wife.
Hmm.
I think Lucy Coleman.
Yeah, I believe so. Hmm.
Have you mentioned sulfur a couple of times? I have recently read an article about sulfur being worse than we have allowed ourselves to admit that it is, and for
And you're
multiple reasons.
you're speaking in the vineyard, or are you speaking
In the
in
vineyard,
the
yeah.
cellar? Okay.
In the vineyard, yeah.
Hmm.
No,
Yeah.
I've read plenty of articles about how bad sulfur is in the cellar. That is not what I'm talking about. Potassium sorbate. Have you heard about this? So apparently, potassium sorbate combined with something that makes it a little sticky, like carrageenan, so like a seaweed extract, is maybe more effective and far more environmentally friendly and less. Like, you need less of it. I might have to do a whole episode about this, but I just wanted to ask if you'd heard about this. But it is like, what the other thing that we don't realize is that, like, the amount of sulfur that gets reported is actually like half of the sulfur that is actually being used, because like once you spray it, it actually like binds and is actually, it's not actually
Right.
70 tons, it's 140 tons of sulfur being sprayed, whatever it is, every year on our vineyards. There's a lot of things, and also where sulfur comes from is usually a byproduct of the fossil fuel industry rather than,
Right.
or we're like mining it, which is less and less what it is. But it's like either way, it's pretty rough. It's a pretty rough
Right.
birth for this thing that is an organically allowed substance.
Right.
And it's also rough on people's lungs, and
Yeah.
all these people that we were talking about who are responsible for the farming and picking and stuff
Right.
like that don't get, they're the ones that are breathing that in most often.
Right.
And so, yeah. Anyway, I mean, obviously it's effective and has worked for thousands of years, but there might be better ways. I think it's one of those things that's worth time. Maybe it's time to question and look at. So,
100%. And unfortunately, I can't speak to potassium sorbate. It's not something I have used when I'm spraying a vineyard, but I do wholly agree with and question this idea of sulfur kind of being like the one thing that we should be relying on when we're talking about powdery mildew management and mitigation. I remember pretty early on in my wine career, and beginning to learn about farming while I was working in New Zealand. This guy Nick Candy, I actually don't know if he's making wines anymore, which is really a shame because they were quite beautiful, but also a really brilliant farmer, vineyard manager. And I remember I was talking to him about sulfur, how he used it, and he really kind of plainly said, and of course, I'm sure he would tell me there was way more nuance to this statement, but he essentially said it really has nothing to do with concentration. It's about timing.
Yeah.
So, the
Yeah.
point he was trying to make was like, yeah, most people would tell you it's like 4 to 5 pounds per acre, but I think that you can use two as long as your timing is good, or maybe one. Like
Right.
his
Right.
experience with it was kind of, to your point, it is probably a lot stronger at lower doses than we really realize. And I kind of, it's funny, I actually unintentionally kind of had proof of concept of that this year. When I was spraying the Riesling vineyard, I actually guess this is now my coming out of admitting this to Lizzie, who I farm this with. I hadn't told her this yet, but I miscalculated. I'm very type A, very organized, and I have all of these like spreadsheet calculators that I've made to just make my life a tiny bit easier when it's 4 a.m. and I'm getting up to go do a tank mix and get ready to spray with a backpack. Um, and I misentered one of the formulas that told me how much my bulk mix needed to be, that I would
Uh-huh.
then empty into my backpack sprayer to go out. So I actually sprayed at about like a quarter of the rate that I was really intending to for our first
Oh.
spray of the season. And, again, like at that point, I'm not really actively trying to mitigate like large populations of powdery mildew spores. It was mostly from mites and maybe trying to just like knock back anything that overwintered that could still be there. But so I effectively sprayed at about a pound per acre and still like had incredibly positive and easy to see results. We have really bad mite issues at that site.
Uh-huh.
Um, and when I went out, the day before the spray, I was looking at the vines and it was pretty bad signs of rhenium, and went out a week later after the spray and it was essentially non-existent.
Wow.
So again, like very unique site, like higher elevation, the aspect is going to affect solar radiation and the ways in which a lot of these compounds function and how powdery mildew behaves, so on and so forth. Really great wind drainage, air drainage, sorry. So I don't know that, like that one point is necessarily incredibly meaningful, but it was one point nonetheless. And again, like I said,
Yeah.
only sprayed. Oh, actually, I apologize. I said twice earlier in this interview, but it was 3 times sprayed sulfur this season. And honestly, I would feel pretty comfortable knocking it back to 2 this coming year, and assuming we have a similar,
Right. I was going to say, depending on the
growing
weather.
conditions,
Yeah.
obviously,
Yeah.
exactly, of course. But like everything about this site, when I looked, there's you can get emails daily if you want with these kind of like pest indexes
Mm.
that are pulled from various weather stations and essentially tell you like what your potential risk is for different things, and you can select which ones you want to be notified about. But so I get, essentially like powdery mildew pest indexes delivered to my inbox every day. And it was like from May 15th on through the whole growing season, it was high every single day. And this is a weather station that is pretty damn close to the vineyard. So it does actually provide some meaningful numbers when you're thinking about it. It's not so far removed where you're in a completely different microclimate. So everything would have told me we would have had horrible powdery mildew issues. And I mean, I was out there 2 or 3 times a week scouting and nothing,
That's
nothing.
amazing. Hmm.
So,
Yeah. Timing is, yeah.
yeah, and I will add, and this is, to bolster this argument of, sulfur maybe not being the only tool we really need to rely on. But I started this year at the recommendation and urging of Stephen up at Analemma, brilliant farmer and
Yeah.
winemaker, to start working with Advancing EcoAg, AEA, which is John Kemp's
Right.
company.
Right.
And, I called them up and kind of got like the whole dog and pony show and their spiel. And I was like, yeah, pretend I don't know anything about farming, which, like I have said numerous times in this interview, I'm learning how to be a farmer, but know enough to, ask the right questions. And it's like, write me a spray program. I want to see like what you would recommend based off of these concerns I have and these different parameters I'm able to communicate to you. So, just out of curiosity, I more or less followed what they recommended. And it was a lot of like kelp derived and
Yeah, they're
desalinated, like seawater products that they offer that have really like pretty great balances of different micro and macronutrients. And I think thanks to like the molybdenum and boron and a couple of other things like and the biological that they recommend you spray with all of these applications, there was such like an incredible holistic benefit from them that really bolstered the plant's immune systems and I think allowed us to get away with 3 sulfur sprays. So again, like
gotcha.
it's
Yeah.
and this is something. There's this other really brilliant farmer in the valley, Diane Namarniki. And I remember when I met her for this first time, I was talking to her a lot about her approach to spraying and also like really doesn't rely heavily on sulfur, has a pretty heavy rotation that she moves through of different biologicals, other kind of like biofungicides, really loves cinerate. So again, I think there is a way to engage with other products and have a bit more well-rounded of a spray program that allows you to move away from sulfur to the extent that OWS would tell you need to rely on it. Or OVS, sorry, not OWS.
I think I will just ask if there's anything else that we should have talked about that you want to talk about before we wrap things up.
Yeah, I think the main thing that I really want to touch on, I guess, is that, and we have done this in some ways, is that wine to me really first and foremost is about people. And I think there are, all sorts of little snippets and sound bites I could pull from our interview that I said and that you said, but I'll just let people remember our whole conversation when they listen to this. But I think that I hope we as a wine culture can start moving a tiny bit more towards people and the story that they provide and not try to, as you so aptly said, like think of people and nature as 2 completely separate entities. I think we really need to start critically thinking more about how we do exist in unison and how we affect one another. And I can't help but think that that's only going to improve the wine that we make, but also the experience that we have with it. It needs to be a tiny bit more holistic than it currently is. But I think also approached with a tiny bit more, what would the best word be? Sincerity and less of a critical eye. And this is something I've used to be horrible about and still like actively work quite hard on, which is whenever I taste a wine, trying to not first and foremost think about what is wrong with it or what I don't like about it, but what is the thing that I do appreciate about it? And what do I think the person who made it was trying to do and say? And try to just give them a tiny bit of a nod for that, even if I don't like it at the end of the day or appreciate it. Just like recognize that someone did put a lot of effort into that and that should be respected. Much in the same way that we want to talk about organics as being kind of like of the utmost importance when we're talking about whether or not we want to buy a wine. I think that assuming that that has been done, we also need to really appreciate that someone did put effort into that thing that is in front of us. And by appreciating that human element, I think then we can actually engage in a more meaningful, sustainable model. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And it sounds so refreshingly inclusive.
Yeah, and again,
and
like I think it's something we could all work on a tiny bit more. And again, like I'm saying that for myself, I try to remind myself every day, like intention and a genuine curiosity of exploring craft is really what matters to me.
Yeah.
And I think if people do that and are trying to do that, I think that's a really important element of a sustainable model.
Love that. Are there
Yeah.
are there ways that are best for people to learn more about you and your winery? Get in touch. I noticed that your website is kind of like membership based, is if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, yes and no. I mean,
It doesn't give a lot of
that is
information without giving information.
yeah, well, yeah, exactly. I mean, so much of my I remember like years ago I got in an argument with my friend Drew Herman about this because I deleted my Instagram in a fit of rage, and he's like, "How do you not get that we are performers? Like this is show business, baby." Like you
Yes,
have to put
yeah.
yourself out there. And I was like, yeah, you know what? You're right. 100%. However, I just don't want the narrative of my wine to start and end with me. I think that's so boring.
Hmm.
Um, because I think there's a way that, again, like we as a wine culture want to put winemakers on pedestals. Um, and I want to allow a tiny bit more room for people to have an interaction with my wines that is unique to them, free from what they feel like is being imposed upon them by my narrative. So part of why I built the website the way that I did, and it is, I will say, a work in progress. There is going to be more added to it over the course of the next year that talks more about the vineyards in depth, talks more about farming ethos. Like it, some of that is coming, but I want it to be relatively bare bones and withhold quite a bit because I want people to try to just taste the wine and first and foremost say, do I like this? Does it bring me joy? If so, why? If not, why? Like the labels are intentionally somewhat abstract. Varieties aren't listed on the bottles anywhere.
Oh, that's
You
what I
really have
wanted
to
to ask
dig
you
through the
about.
website a tiny bit because again, like so much of my kind of like early entry into wine was with zero tutelage, zero reading, zero understanding, zero context. So everything that I tasted was new and novel to me. And it was such an exciting time in wine drinking for me.
Hmm.
Because, like, if someone told me, oh, well, this is what, Montrachet should taste like, I would have looked at them and said, well, what the fuck is Montrachet? I don't,
Yeah.
what? Um, So I could taste it completely free from any sort of constraints and really like develop my own memory bank and experience with it without feeling like, oh, I should say that this is good because this person of notoriety told me that it's good. So I
Hmm.
think there's some part of me that's trying to dismantle that like
Yeah. Yeah.
hierarchy and supremacy of wine knowledge by trying to not give a ton up front. Like if anyone wants to call me and talk about like tannin polymerization in a reductive setting and why I choose to ferment reds the way that I do, I will do that ad nauseum until they probably get up and leave the room because they're so bored. But I don't want to lead with all of my decisions, my whole narrative. I want there to be a tiny bit more room for the other person to bring what they want to bring first, formulate their questions or what it is they would want to know once they have already tasted and decided whether or not it's something they want to more meaningfully engage with, so they don't feel like they're being hit over the head with a whole bunch of details that they don't actually need. Um, So I think that's a big part of it for me. I really want to try to, at least as is reasonable for me to do in my very tiny, tiny, tiny sliver of the wine world, shift the dialogue and narrative around wine in a way that is more about every person who engages with it. Because at the end of the day, I'm making this for people. So I think they should get to have a tiny bit more of a say than they historically do when they're engaging with it.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, I mean, that, of course, I resonate, and this whole podcast is really about breaking down that hierarchy of, or the presumed hierarchy of knowledge
right.
in wine. The gate kept, the
Mhm.
culture of, what I call vinifera culture, which is
Yeah.
no knock on vinifera, just knock on the culture.
Yeah.
The sort of, yeah, like it's it's cultural colonialism. That
Yeah.
now
Yeah.
is a global monoculture.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But so I guess to more directly answer your question, I love talking to people. I love talking about wine. I love sharing my passion and enthusiasm for what I do and what so many of my colleagues and friends and mentors do. So, go to my website. There's a tab up there where I think it just says contact, where you can shoot me an email, ask me any question you could ever want to ask, and I'll answer it to the best of my ability. But yeah, website is there, and like I said, it's a slow process, just because farming and winemaking tends to take up more of my time than.
People can buy
I mean,
wine.
I should give more time to marketing, I suppose, but I can't. But yeah, so website will be built out, but I try to post pretty sincerely, honestly, and vulnerably to Instagram as frequently as I can to give people a tiny bit more insight into my approach, who I am as a person, and why I love doing what I do. So I think like reading through Instagram, my Instagram is in a pretty easy way. Yeah. Hopefully listening to your podcast and maybe getting a better sense for some of the stuff that I believe in.
Nice. Yeah. I'm sure we could continue talking, but I'm going to let's.
We probably could. Yeah.
But thank you for this. Really, really,
Yeah.
real pleasure.
Yeah, it was such a treat getting to talk to you, and yeah, any opportunity to kind of ramble on and engage in some, I don't know, healthy dialogue and debate about wine and farming and kind of where the industry stands is, I think, always of great benefit.
Yeah. Hey, thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate you joining in to these podcasts. If you'd like to support these podcasts, probably the best way to do that is to just join Substack as a paid subscriber at beyondorganicwine.substack.com. It also gives you access to all the paid episodes and other content that I will be releasing on Substack. And I also want to thank Colden Pro for this beautiful closing music.